When Francisco Lindor is your starting shortstop, do you really need a backup? On today's show, I will discuss that topic as well as break down the top 5 catching prospects in the Mets farm system right now.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, so far in Mets camp, there hasn't been too many storylines for us to really sink our teeth into, other than, of course, the Mets starting rotation being ravaged by injuries and the battle for the final bench spot. When it comes to the Mets roster, as we've been talking about for weeks now, if not months, there's really one spot up for grabs, and that is who will be the backup utility infielder. And I told you from the beginning, this was a competition that was going to come down to Luisangel Acuña and Brett Baty. Now, Nick Madrigal was one of the options that was on the background of this competition when camp started, but now that he has a dislocated shoulder that turned into a fractured shoulder, which will have him out for a long time, he is completely off the board when it comes to this discussion. I actually had to read an article today by Anthony DiComo about Donovan Walton and how he is a prime candidate to make this team because you just need a backup shortstop. But I'm going to talk about Walton and that idea of having to have a backup shortstop a little bit more in the next segment, because I'm going to poke some real holes into that. But again, I still hold the belief that come opening day, it'll either be Acuña or Baty that is on the roster. So once again, these two guys were featured prominently in the starting lineup. You had Acuña batting leadoff, starting at second base. Baty, he bat fifth, and he was your third baseman, first, second. Yeah, he was fifth. He started at third. And then, of course, Donovan Walton batted ninth, and he was your starting shortstop. Now, Acuña got the game going pretty well against the Astros. Leadoff single, lacing a line drive into left field. He then stole second base. The throw went into the outfield. Acuña was standing on third. He ends up scoring on a base hit by Jesse Winker to get the Mets on the board. Brett Baty ended up grounding out to end that first inning. Now, later on, you saw in the top of the second inning, Jose Siri crushed a home run, and he pimped it. Jared Young and Donovan Walton each got base hits with one out. Then Luisangel Acuña grounded out to drive in a run. So run scored, RBI, 1 for 3 day for Acuña with one strikeout. Not a bad day at the office, just not quite as good of a day as Brett Baty. Because in the third inning, Baty fell behind 0-2, battled back into the count, ended up drawing it full. And then he hit his first home run of spring, taking a pitch that was low and somewhere between, middle to away, and he golfed it, pulled it out. And it wasn't against some scrub either. It was against Hayden Wesneski, who has a shot to be part of the Astros rotation come opening day. If not, he'll likely be in their bullpen. Guy with a 3.93 career ERA and a 3.86 ERA last year, who needed just 4 pitches to get through the first 2 batters of the frame. I believe it was Winker and Tyrone Taylor. So I only mentioned Wesneski's name because, if you see a 4A pitcher that grooved a 91-mile-per-hour fastball down the middle that Brett Baty hit out, how much are you going to take from it? But this didn't really look like a bad pitch. It just looked like a good piece of hitting from Baty, who, again, fell behind, drew a full count, and then got a barrel on the ball. And, without really having to put a full swing on it even, was able to pull it out. And it just shows you the raw power that Baty has. He is a big, strong kid that just has to, get barrel to ball and lift a little bit more. And there really could be 20 home run power here for Baty at the big league level. It's just, is he ever going to figure it out? And so far, so good in camp. My argument for Baty, which I'm sure, and I've seen some comments on YouTube, some of you are tired of, and I get it. But my argument has not been that Brett Baty is the second coming, that Brett Baty is going to be the superstar third baseman that we thought he might be when he debuted. My argument is Brett Baty is best suited to win this job, and that Baty is going to get the first crack at the backup utility infielder role. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on here. But Baty ends up hitting the home run, 5th inning. Again, he falls behind the count, ends up lacing a single after he battled it full. So he's had nothing but good at bat so far. Across 3 spring games, Baty is 5 for 8 with a double and a home run, has yet to strike out or draw a walk. So again, at this stage of the game, I'm looking at the Mets roster and this competition, and I just think Baty has the inside track. And obviously, Acuña certainly could fit this roster as well. His abilities as a defensive wizard around the diamond could be very useful. And I think before camp started, if you were listening to old episodes of the show, I was more of the belief that Acuña was going to make this roster because I felt like the Mets needed a backup shortstop, because I believed that, or I believed, and maybe I still do believe, that Acuña brings a ton to the table off the Mets bench. I think he is really suited for a bench role, and I think long term that might be his role for the New York Mets, a guy that can play all over the place, that can factor into the center field mix as well as being your backup shortstop while eating into Jeff McNeil's time at second and even being part of a platoon there as he would complement McNeil, where you could have McNeil, sit on the bench against lefties and have Acuña in there. There's a lot to like about Luisangel Acuña. At the same time, Luisangel Acuña has development gains that could still be found in AAA. He still can go down there and prove that he can thrive against AAA pitching, something he has yet to do. Brett Baty, anytime he goes down, he thrives against AAA pitching, just like we see him thrive in spring training because it's still probably along that same level. Baty's last step, and it's the step that he might not ever overcome, is seeing if he can hit big league pitching. There is nothing that can be gained for Brett Baty in AAA. I really believe that. Now, could he put up big numbers and maybe moderately enhance his trade value? I mean, sure. But again, I've said this before, any other team that wants to acquire Brett Baty is going to want to see it at the big league level. So right now, when I'm thinking about the competition between those two guys in particular, because I don't even want to entertain Donovan Walton, although I'll talk about him a little bit more in the next segment, you're looking at Baty, and I just think this is a guy that showed up to camp, and he seems to have some confidence again. If he continues to hit like this, he is going to win that job, and he'll get his opportunities, whether that's eating into Jeff McNeil's playing time a little bit. I'm sure the Mets might see a tough matchup during the week where they might want to have Vientos on the bench for a game. You can get Brett Baty in there. Or if you want to, you could always DH Vientos and have Baty start a game at third base, have him as the only left-handed bat off the bench. To me, the role is starting to make more and more sense. And the only question mark is, can you really roll into the season without a backup shortstop? I want to talk about that in the next segment. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. This bag's almost empty. I got to go out and get some more Wonderful Pistachios because I love this honey roasted flavor. If you're looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats that help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shell variety because it makes it such a good on-the-go snack. Whether I'm heading out to the golf course or if I'm going on a road trip, Wonderful Pistachios are my main snack that I choose because it's a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, there is the in-shell options that are a classic favorite as well. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. I believe we're a little over 500 away, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Last year, Jose Iglesias was promoted to the big league roster on May 31st. Brett Baty was sent down. At the time, this decision was about giving Mark Vientos the keys to third base. There was a little bit of a timeshare for a few weeks where you saw a platoon between Baty and Vientos Vientos kept on hitting, kept on getting more opportunities, and the Mets decided, all right, let's not continue to roll without a backup middle infielder, because remember, at the time, they cut Joey Wendell to bring Vientos up, and they didn't have not only a backup shortstop, they didn't have a backup second baseman, because at that point, Brett Baty had only played third base in his career. He ends up going down, and he adds some versatility that started to give him some time at second base so that he could have that in his bag moving forward. Mark Vientos ran with that starting third base job, and the rest is sort of history on that front. But as it relates to having a backup shortstop, one of the reasons why the Mets were excited to have Iglesias up at the time was because, all right, you have a backup shortstop. You have somebody that can start a game for Lindor, that can come in and replace Lindor if there's a blowout. So I ask you, from May 31st until September 13th, when Francisco Lindor went down with that back injury, there was a 90-game span where Jose Iglesias was the only other shortstop on the Mets roster. How many games did Jose Iglesias play shortstop for the New York Mets across that 90-game sample? The answer? A total of 3 games and 4 innings overall. The Mets need a backup shortstop. Donovan Walton can play short, so he should make the team over 2 guys who you have a ton invested in for the future of your ball club. You should burn big league experience on Donovan Walton, a 30-year-old infielder that has a career 174 batting average in the big leagues. Anthony DiComo sold them well. The Mets, they love Donovan Walton. One of the first signings they had in the middle of November, a gamer. Okay. I'm not trying to completely knock the guy, but come on. If Donovan Walton makes this team because the Mets decide that Acuña is not ready and they need a backup shortstop, then honestly, they should suspend David Stearns for not signing Jose Iglesias. Because if they end up having Donovan Walton on the roster while Jose Iglesias is playing for the Athletics, I can't say a fireable offense. I love David Stearns too much, but it's a suspendable offense. Like, come on. There's no chance that Donovan Walton makes this team. I'm not buying it because I'm not buying this need for a backup shortstop. And if it is there, fine. Roster Acuña. I mean, come on. Donovan Walton, I'm not going to get there. And the reality is, when Francisco Lindor is your starting shortstop, there's only a finite amount of opportunities for a backup. And for the most part, that is coming into games when it's a blowout on either side. That's it. You look at the breakdown of Lindor's playing time over the last 3 years, because obviously his first year in a Mets uniform, he got hurt. The Mets traded for Javi Baez to replace him for a little bit. They had Guillorme at the time. There were some other options. But when you're talking about the last 3 years, Francisco Lindor has played 161 games in 2022, 160 games in 2023, 152 games last year. When you look at the innings breakdown, 2022, Lindor played 1,378 and 2/3 innings. Louis Guillorme played 15 games at short, only started 3, played a total of 52 innings. Devin Marrero, who I don't even remember, played 7 innings. 96% of the innings played throughout the 2022 season at shortstop were played by Francisco Lindor. 2023, Lindor played 1,365 and a third innings. He started 158 games, had a couple games at DH. Louis Guillorme played 25 innings at short. Jonathan Arauz played 22 innings at short. Lindor played 96.7% of the innings at the position. Prior to the injury last year, there was the 4 innings that Iglesias played and the 16 that Joey Wendell played. So from the beginning of the season until September 13th, when Lindor went down, he had played all but 20 innings of shortstop. So how much do you need a backup shortstop? Because if you're just talking about the Mets are up 12-1 and it's the 7th inning, you want to get Lindor out of there. Do you really think Jeff McNeil can't slide over to shortstop and field a ground ball that's hit to him for 3 innings? Or even that Brett Baty can't do it, or even that Mark Vientos couldn't do it for that matter. Quite frankly, in a 12-1 game, you could throw Jesse Winker at shortstop, and I think it would be fine. The opportunities that we're talking about, the need for a backup shortstop, it is so limited when Lindor's your starter because Lindor wants to be in there. every single day. He was just recently asked about this. Do you want more off days throughout the season? He said, Major League Baseball does a great job of giving us off days throughout the season. And speaking of that, early in the year, the Mets do have plenty of off days to ease Lindor and the rest of the team into the season. So if we're just talking about who's going to be your backup utility infielder in April, I really don't think it is that big of a deal that Brett Baty might make the roster instead of Acuña. And it's not to say that Acuña is not going to make the team. To me, the argument is Acuña can go down to AAA, a level that he hasn't thrived at yet, prove that he can hit there, play every single day while you're giving playing time to Jeff McNeil and Brett Baty at the big league level. And guess what? If those two guys are not hitting at all at second base, well, now you have an Acuña who maybe is red hot, that you bring him up and he's your backup shortstop and you're starting second baseman. And maybe you're giving Acuña the keys to second base or the keys to center field if Jose Siri and Tyron Taylor are doing nothing. And you have a guy that has worked on his game, has maybe worked a little bit at third base because he hasn't done that before. A guy that, maybe got some more time in center and left in the minor leagues, really playing all over the place, getting ready for that super utility role that he might play. Having Luisangel Acuña on the Mark Vientos track from last year, where Vientos, even though he had a ton of time in AAA and had success in AAA, unlike Acuña, he still had something to work on, his defense at third. He did that. He played every day at the position. He came up. He held it down. So this is not me saying, and I think it's getting misconstrued, that I'm just all in on Brett Baty. I do want to see Brett Baty get another shot because this is a first-round pick that was a top 25 prospect in baseball, and you don't just give up on those guys. Yes, he has been overall bad in 169 big league games. I'm not going to sugarcoat what he's done, but I don't think that his career is over just yet. It might need to happen with another organization. But give him one last crack at it when there's nothing else for him to gain in AAA. There's not. So you start the season with Baty, you have Acuña in AAA, and you have Mauricio in AAA. And those two guys get to play a ton. They get to have their swing right. And then as the season progresses, these conversations, these discussions, these problems solve themselves. Because at some point, Jeff McNeil might get hit in the wrist again. And all of a sudden, now you got a starting second base job open. And guess what? Brett Baty and Acuña are platooning at second. Ronnie Mauricio, ends up getting an opportunity because Vientos goes down and he's your third baseman. You never know what's going to happen in the season. Or maybe Alonso goes down and Vientos slides to first, and now Mauricio's playing third for you, or Baty's playing third. All of these guys are going to get run this year. And I'm sure at some point when it's all said and done and the chips fall and we look at the final picture of the season, Francisco Lindor will be right around 1,365 innings again, somewhere in that range. He'll play over 1,300 innings, and there'll be maybe at most 75 to 100 innings that are played by other guys. And yes, if Luisangel Acuña was on the roster, you could absolutely give Lindor more rest. You could DH him some, and you can start Luisangel Acuña a little bit. That can happen. But guess what? That could also be the reality that you're living with in June, because in June, Acuña might be on the roster. And that might be a point in the season where Lindor's starting to feel it in the dog days a little bit. So I just think that you have to understand that the roster is not a complete picture on opening day, and it's going to evolve. And so I know not to beat a dead horse here, but when I say that Brett Baty is going to make this team, or that he's best suited to make this team, is because I think he's going to continue to have great numbers in spring. And ultimately the decision is going to come down to a guy that has nothing left to prove in AAA and a guy that can still get better in AAA. And the best way to develop and to curate your roster throughout the season is to start with the guys that can use work in AAA there, and to open the season with, yes, a lack of a backup shortstop, but I'm sure they'll stick Baty in a couple games or Jeff McNeil at the end of camp and say, okay, it didn't look terrible. Let's roll. So that's where I'm at with this situation. The last thing I'll say about that, if Wilmer Flores can start at shortstop in a pennant race with Daniel Murphy playing second, I think the Mets can close a blowout with Jeff McNeil and Brett Baty up the middle, and they'll be fine. And if they're winning 14-1, those two guys are not going to blow an entire game. So that's where I'm at with it. To close out the show, though, we're going to change gears entirely. I am going to start talking a little bit of prospects and break down the top 5 catching prospects in this system. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back after a quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So let's talk about the top 5 catching prospects in the Mets farm system. This is going to lead to a show that I'm planning to do this week, which is the top 5 prospects that just missed my top 10. So basically, prospects 11 to 15. And 2 of the guys that I believe will crack that list or be just on the outside of it is Daiverson, Gutierrez, and Yovanny Rodriguez, the 2 catching prospects that I would call the best in the Mets system right now. Now, Gutierrez signed for $1.9 million in 2023. A year later, Yovanny Rodriguez signed for $2.85 million. So these guys got a big portion of the bonus pool in consecutive years for the Mets. Guys they invested a lot into. Gutierrez struggled in the Dominican Summer League in 2023, posted an OPS of 565 in 50 games, so he sort of fell off the radar a little bit. Started 2023 in the DSL again, played 14 games, hit 300 with a 472 on base, a 475 slug, had 7 walks to 5 strikeouts, doubled 7 times. The Mets said, you know what? Let's bring you stateside. So he goes and he starts to play in the Florida Complex League. In 15 games, Gutierrez hit 317 with a 463 on base, a 537 slug, exactly a 1,000 OPS, 2 home runs, 3 doubles, 9 walks to 4 strikeouts. They moved him up again to St. Lucie. And in 8 games, he did get blown up a bit. He struck out 9 times, did not walk, went 3 for 27. So this year, Gutierrez is going to start the year at low A. I'm very intrigued by his ability to get on base at a high clip, hit for a high average, potentially tap into a little more power, be a solid defender behind the dish. Gutierrez, to me, really kind of shot up the rankings a little bit after a really down first year in the Mets organization. And now you're sort of seeing why the Mets invested so much into him. So he's definitely a guy I'm very intrigued with as he goes into year 3 and his first complete full season stateside, where he's likely to be the starting catcher in Port St. Lucie. Now, Yovanny Rodriguez was the big ticket guy the Mets signed last year. He posted better DSL numbers than Gutierrez. And spoiler, I think Rodriguez is the best catching prospect in the Mets system. Again, you're talking about a guy that got nearly $3 million for his signing bonus. All of these catchers come from Venezuela, where Francisco Alvarez was signed out of. And that was sort of not necessarily the comp, but it was just, all right, well, here the Mets are again, another Venezuelan catcher that's highly regarded that they've signed with Rodriguez. And he held his own. He held his own in the DSL. It wasn't outstanding numbers, but a 715 OPS is not bad. 8 doubles, 3 triples, 2 home runs in 44 games. Expect him to probably spend the year in the complex. And I think, we'll really get a good taste of what he can bring to the table this year. It's obviously still going to be a long, long time before you see Yovanny Rodriguez up in the big leagues, but he is a guy that has a ton of potential. That's what the signing bonus suggests. And again, the fact that he didn't get blown up when he was he 17 years old last year in the Dominican Summer League? I'll check this real quick to make sure. 17. He turned 18 in November. So a teenager, obviously there's a lot of teenagers in that league, but I'm very intrigued by what he brings to the table this year as he likely ends up in the complex or at the complex. Let's talk about Christopher Suero. And I've seen some outlets that might have him as the top catching prospect in this system, and I'm not mad at that. He's 21 years old. The Mets signed him in 2022. He impressed in 2023 at the complex, posting an 891 OPS in 22 games. Last year, he started off in Port St. Lucie, hit 265, got on base at a 390 clip, 434 slug, had an 824 OPS. This is a very athletic catcher. He has plenty of speed. They've actually played him in left field a little bit as well as first base. So he's cultivating some versatility. We've seen some catchers in the big leagues that do give you a little bit of everything when it comes to that, like God, geez, the Guardians guy. I'm blanking here. Jeez. David Fry, man. David Fry, though, we saw last year, catch some, play some outfield. So it's good when you see a catcher that is developing in that way and plenty of speed. This is a guy that stole 20 bases last year. Now, what I like about the stolen base department for Suero, he was 5 out of 10 in Port St. Lucie. So that's not necessarily, great when it comes to stealing bases. But then as he got promoted and came out to Brooklyn, he actually stole 15 bases on 21 attempts. So that's showing some improvement there. All of a sudden, you're talking about a guy that might be able to routinely steal 20 bases a year. That's not bad. He didn't hit great in Brooklyn, only a 228 average, but he got on base at a 353 clip, only slugged a 350 clip. It's a 703 OPS. When you're looking at a guy that has good plate discipline, the potential with a hit tool that can still evolve, and the ability to be really athletic behind the dish and also bring some of that athleticism to other positions and on the base pass, that's kind of an intriguing guy to be a backup catcher in the future. So Christopher Suero, definitely a name to watch this year. Expect him to maybe continue in Brooklyn for a little bit longer, but could quickly end up in Double-A. And we'll see where he goes from there. Definitely a name to watch. Another guy to talk about, Ronald Hernandez. Now, he came over to the Mets in the David Robertson trade. It was Ronald Hernandez and Marco Vargas that were two, players that were playing in the Florida Complex League for the Marlins. Came over to the Mets, guys that were getting on base at an incredible clip, known for their plate discipline. We saw more of that from Hernandez this past year. Got on base a 362 clip, hit 271, only slugged at a 359 clip. So putting it all together, it was a 721 OPS. He is regarded for his leadership behind the plate, his game calling, his receiving. He continues to improve and seems to be like a pretty solid defensive catcher to build off of, eventually becoming maybe a backup catcher in the big leagues. He got a late season promotion to Brooklyn and really struggled. He got blown up, 16 strikeouts and 36 at bats. That's pretty brutal. A 508 OPS, but that was 10 games. So this year, imagine again, you'll see Hernandez and Suero sort of splitting time in Brooklyn. At some point, Suero, if he plays well, will get a promotion to Double-A, and that'll give the keys a little more Hernandez to be the primary catcher in Brooklyn, where he might spend most of the season. But he's definitely one of the catching prospects that you want to keep an eye on. I don't see necessarily either Suero or Hernandez being a starting catcher in the big leagues, but you never know what can happen. That's where I look at Yovanny Rodriguez and I say, okay, he's the top catching prospect in the system. Same thing for Daiverson Gutierrez, guys that maybe have that ability to ascend a little bit further, potentially have the helium to shoot up prospect lists at some point with a big season. These other guys, they're good, but I don't know how high of a ceiling they can get to. Last guy to talk about in the top 5 catching prospects in the Mets system is a guy that anyone who has listened to this show knows I do not value much as a prospect anymore. That is Kevin Parada. Kevin Parada, every single year, his offensive numbers have gotten worse. 114 games played last year in Double-A, 13 home runs, a 653 OPS, struck out 34% of the time, has never been regarded for the glove. Just a first-round pick that feels wasted at this point. You hate to say it, but it's just been brutal, honestly. It seems like he gets worse year over year. Now, granted, there was a story written at the beginning of spring talking about Kevin Parada as a best shape in my life guy. There's always those guys that show up to camp, and it's all the talk is, man, look at Parada. He lost some weight. He looks good. He cut out the salted caramel ice cream that apparently was a go-to snack for him and allowed the sweets and sugar. So we'll see, but getting more athletic, that could help him as a catcher. Is that going to help him when it comes to chasing out of the zone all the time? Is that going to really improve? We'll see. We'll see what happens with Parada. We'll see where they start him. I mean, you can make the case to put him in Syracuse just based on his age and trying to continue his development, but he didn't really earn that promotion. So maybe you put him back in Binghamton to start the year. I'm not even really sure what the Mets plan to do with Parada. I hope that he can have a really nice season this year and the Mets can get a team to bite on him at the deadline as a throw-in and a trade. Because I can't envision Parada being Francisco Alvarez's backup in 2026. I mean, that's what your hope would be in Kevin Parada. Your ideal outcome is that he returns to being the hitter that he was in college, and he proves that he could be a not plus, but a plus bat. When you're talking prospects, you got to be careful throwing multiple pluses around, because the prospect heads will be like, no. There's only plus is your 70, 80 grade tools. You can't say that for Kevin Parada hit tool. But look, can Kevin Parada get back to being a good offensive catcher that is passable defensively? I think that's what you're hoping for, where it makes sense to roster him because he does give you that. But I just have not seen it, and I won't believe it until I start to see it. And even then, I probably won't believe it. So Kevin Parada, to me, is the 5th best catching prospect in this system. That will probably seem to be crazy, but I look at Ronald Hernandez and Christopher Suero, and I think, all right, I could see those guys being good defensive catchers in the big leagues as backups. I can't see that for Parada. And unless Parada hits, why am I going to put him over a couple of guys that at least give me the glove and also, have presented at least some solid discipline? I mean, these aren't guys that are striking out at absurd clips like Kevin Parada is. So that's where I'm at with him. Final honorable mention when it comes to the top catching prospects in the Mets system. Hayden Senger is a guy that might end up on a big league roster at some point just because he is so damn good with the glove. He is an elite defensive catcher, not a great hitter, but he has stayed in this system and gotten invites to big league camp because of his ability to be a strong defender behind the plate. And if nothing else, that's going to keep him employed for a long time in the game, because he's the type of guy that might end up being a bullpen catcher one day and having a very long career where he's squatting down in his 40s, like David Raccanello and Eric Langeal. But Hayden Senger, you never know. He might just find himself on the Mets big league roster this year. If Torrens goes down and you just want to get a great defender up, Senger's your guy. I mean, he's going to be in AAA. He's not necessarily considered prospect at this point. I mean, he was a 24th round pick in 2018. He's played over 400 games in that system, but he's a great catcher. And when it comes to catching prospects, that's the part that matters. I mean, look around the league. How many guys are really plus bats at the catcher position? Maybe 10 at most. Maybe it's 15. And a lot of those guys is sort of year to year. Like Danny Jansen might be good one year, and then last year he wasn't great at all offensively. So it's really hit or miss at this position when it comes to the bat. And that's where you see a guy like Austin Hedges have a very long career where he continues to get job after job after job because he's a great leader, he's a great catcher, and teams value what you can do behind the plate defensively a lot more really than what you can do with the bat. So I would not rule out Hayden Senger to get some big league service time at some point. And I hope he does. I mean, the guy's been grinding in the Mets system for a very long time. But to go through my rankings of the top catching prospects in the Mets system, I got Yovanny Rodriguez, number 1, Daiverson Gutierrez, number 2, Christopher Suero, number 3, Ronald Hernandez, number 4, Kevin Parada, number 5, and an honorable mention to Hayden Senger. Assuming we don't have any big news that comes out on Wednesday, tomorrow's show, I will give you my top 5, my 5 just missed in our top 10. So basically 11 through 15 on my top 15 prospects in the Mets system. So I'll talk a little bit about potentially one of these catchers again, but also some other players that aren't quite in my top 10, but they are dangerously close guys that could certainly have vaulted into that list with a solid season this year. That's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button as well. You can also hit the notification bell so you don't miss any episodes. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local host from each team, league-wide host from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.